Voter registration is designed to suppress voter turnout. That's why it exists. Simply standardizing registration could have a huge impact on voter turnout. One 1972 study estimated that if all states had the same registration laws, using the most permissive state laws, turnout for that year's presidential election would have been 9% higher. It should come as no surprise that American registration requirements depress voter turnout. That is precisely why voter registration was created in the first place. This is no secret, and political scientists have known about it for a long time. In 1930, political scientist Howard Gosnell said, "Putting the burden of registering on the individual rather than the government has long been considered a leading cause of low voting rates in the United States." Massachusetts was the first state to require registration before voting in 1800. Back then, as now, a typical justification was reducing voter fraud. But there was always an anti-immigrant aspect as well. Early registry laws included waiting periods, sometimes as long as 21 years, before a newly registered citizen could vote. Registration laws didn't really catch on until the late 1800s. Registration laws swept through the South like wildfire after the Civil War as a way to disenfranchise former slaves. Between 1876 and 1912, nearly half of northern states amended their constitutions to allow voting registration laws. This time, registration was intended to discourage the poor and less educated from voting in cities. Ironically, it was the progressive movement that helped spearhead voting registration requirements. It was one of their favorite reforms, because during the Gilded Age, when robber barons completely controlled American politics, registration was seen as a way of cleaning up elections. Unfortunately, voter registration had the opposite effect of ultimately helping concentrate the power of the rich. Recent immigrants were viewed as ignorant and easily misled by greedy plutocrats. Those same plutocrats were more than happy to have those laws enacted because populist and socialist agitation worried them that unlimited suffrage could lead to chaos and diminishing profits. No matter who was passing registration laws, the goal was the same: make it harder for some to vote and easier for others. We often associate literacy tests, poll taxes, and long waiting periods with the disenfranchisement of blacks in the South. But voter registration laws had an even wider scope, designed to exclude lower and working class populations generally. The new procedures gradually took their toll and voter turnout dropped, specifically as a result of voter registration. Ultimately, voter registration successfully shrank the entire electorate, affecting all national politics. It has essentially become a self-sustaining cycle. Fewer voters mean limited interests for the major parties, so the major parties work to maintain the scope of the electorate and sustain these limited interests, rather than open things up to a wider galaxy of policy possibilities. People who don't vote get ignored. Over time, the two-party system adapted to a smaller electorate, created by voter registration barriers, then reinforced those barriers by ignoring the concerns of those on the outside, giving them no incentive to get involved. The shrunken electorate provided an opening for organized money. Like a hydraulic, as the influence of the economic elites goes up, the influence of voters goes down. Piven and Cloward conclude the domination of both parties by economic elites would have been less complete were it not for the sharp decline in voting. As turnout fell, national politics moved sharply to the right, each development both cause and consequence of the other. Studies show that countries with higher voter turnout tend to have lower economic inequality. As one study describes, high levels of democratic participation are associated with more equal distributions of income. This means that more political engagement from lower income people translates into less economic inequality. Poor people who tend to vote are harder to ignore. When minority and low-income Americans are blocked from voting, it is much easier for the political class to pretend that they don't exist. Therefore, if poor people start to threaten the cozy stability of the political class, we can force American politicians to start addressing inequality seriously. If you're willing to consider that shrinking the electorate might have helped solidify the power of the rich, and our goal is to find ways to neutralize the excessive power of the rich over our political system and our lives, then expanding the electorate should be one of our goals. If the rich win by disenfranchising large segments of the American population, we can win by doing the opposite. Making sure everyone is able to exercise their most fundamental democratic right is an honorable goal, and it's the right thing to do. Let's make them pay.